Picture this. It's 1993, and Linda Evangelista is getting ready for another shoot. She's standing in front of a mirror, applying her own makeup because she trusts no one else to touch her face. She's about to walk onto a set where she'll earn more money in one day than most people make in a year. She's at the absolute peak of her power, the woman who literally won't get out of bed for less than $10,000. Fast forward to 2021. That same woman posts a message on Instagram that breaks the internet. "I was brutally disfigured," she writes. "I have become a recluse." The woman who once graced 700 magazine covers now hides from cameras. The chameleon who could transform into anyone is now too ashamed to be seen by anyone. What happened in those 28 years? How does someone go from commanding the highest fees in fashion history to living in hiding? How does the pursuit of perfection, the very thing that made Linda Evangelista a household name, become the thing that destroys her? Here's what nobody talks about when they celebrate the 90s Supermodel era. Yes, these women broke barriers. Yes, they made millions. Yes, they became the first models to achieve true celebrity status. But they also paid a price that nobody saw coming, a price that went far beyond money, far beyond fame, far beyond anything they could have imagined when they first stepped onto those runways. This isn't just Linda's story. It's the story of an entire generation of women who were told they could have it all as long as they stayed perfect forever. Spoiler alert, nobody stays perfect forever. And when perfection fails, the fall is devastating. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into the real story behind those iconic 90s covers. The story of what happens when an industry built on impossible standards finally breaks the people trying to meet them. Let's rewind to the early 1990s, when something unprecedented was happening in the fashion world. For the first time in history, models weren't just pretty faces selling clothes. They were becoming celebrities in their own right, household names with the kind of star power usually reserved for movie stars and musicians. Naomi Campbell was making history as the first black model to appear on the covers of Time magazine and Vogue France. Think about that for a second. We're talking about the late 80s and early 90s here, and Naomi was literally breaking down barriers that had existed for decades in the fashion industry. Then you had Cindy Crawford, who managed to pull off something that sounds impossible even today. In 1992, she had 6 simultaneous billboards in New York City's Times Square. 6. That's not a typo. The same month, she appeared on 6 major US magazine covers. Like, imagine walking through Times Square and seeing the same face looking down at you from every direction. Claudia Schiffer was racking up magazine covers faster than anyone could count. We're talking over 1,000 covers by the end of her career, which is literally a Guinness World Record. Karl Lagerfeld made her his muse at Chanel, and by 1992, she was commanding $20,000 for a single runway show. But the queen of quotable moments was Linda Evangelista. In the early 90s, she famously declared, "We don't wake up for less than $10,000 a day." At the time, people thought she was being dramatic, maybe even a little bratty. Looking back now, that quote perfectly captured just how much power these women had amassed. They weren't just models anymore. They were brands, empires, cultural forces. Christy Turlington became the face of Calvin Klein's Eternity fragrance, and Vogue's Grace Coddington called her the most beautiful woman in the world. Helena Christensen was dominating music videos, especially that iconic Wicked Game video that went viral on MTV. The money was insane. These women were earning millions, jet-setting between Paris, Milan, and New York, partying with rock stars and dating billionaires. Linda Evangelista was spotted with everyone from Kyle MacLachlan to François-Henri Pinault. Helena Christensen was dating INXS singer Michael Hutchence. Cindy Crawford married Richard Gere. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like these women had cracked the code. They'd figured out how to turn beauty into real power, real wealth, real influence. They were living proof that you could be more than just a pretty face. But here's what nobody was talking about at the time. All that power, all that success, all that perfection, it came with expectations that were impossible to meet. The mid-90s brought something that would divide not just the fashion industry, but American culture itself. It was called heroin chic, and it completely flipped the beauty standards that the original supermodels had established. Kate Moss was the face of this movement. At 5 feet 7 inches and with a waifish, almost boyish figure, she was the complete opposite of the curvaceous, glamorous supermodels who had dominated the late 80s and early 90s. When she started appearing in Calvin Klein ads, the contrast was jarring. Where Cindy Crawford and Claudia Schiffer represented this polished, healthy glamour, Kate Moss looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her aesthetic was raw, almost dirty. The fashion world called it dirty realism when she first appeared on the Face magazine at 16, and the industry went absolutely wild for it. Suddenly, designers weren't just booking the established supers. They wanted this new kind of beauty, this anti-beauty that Kate represented. She was booking major campaigns, walking for the biggest houses, and challenging everything the fashion world thought it knew about what sold. But the backlash was swift, and it came from the highest levels of government. In 1996, President Bill Clinton publicly denounced the heroin chic trend, saying it was glamorizing drug abuse. Think about that. The President of the United States felt the need to weigh in on a fashion trend because he was worried about its impact on American teenagers. Vogue's editors started speaking out too. Anna Wintour, John Galliano, Stella McCartney, they all criticized the look for potentially triggering eating disorders in young women. Even some of the original supermodels had mixed reactions. Christy Turlington was vocal about her concerns, while others in the industry quietly rode the trend. The tension was palpable. You had two competing visions of perfection happening simultaneously. On one side, you had the established supers maintaining their glamorous, healthy image. On the other, you had this new wave of models who looked like they were wasting away. And caught in the middle of all this were the models themselves, trying to figure out which version of perfection they were supposed to embody. The industry's message was confusing at best, harmful at worst. Be healthy but not too healthy. Be thin but maybe thinner. Be perfect, but we're changing the definition of perfect every season. The pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. By 1997, something unprecedented happened at London Fashion Week. A group of models, including legendary figures like Twiggy and Janice Dickinson, took what they called an anti-anorexia oath. They pledged to publicly declare if they had an eating disorder. The fact that this oath was even necessary tells you everything you need to know about how toxic the environment had become. These women were essentially saying, "We need to promise not to starve ourselves to death for your entertainment." But the industry's response wasn't to ease up on the pressure. If anything, it intensified. Because now there were more ways to be imperfect, more standards to fall short of, more reasons to feel like you weren't enough. What the public didn't see was the relentless, exhausting work that went into maintaining that perfect image. Every photograph, every runway walk, every public appearance had to be flawless. There was no room for bad days, bad angles, or bad moods. The models themselves started talking about the pressure in ways that revealed just how intense it had become. The demand for constant youth was particularly brutal. In an industry where a model could be considered over the hill at 25, many of the original supers were pushing into their 30s and beyond. The solution for many became cosmetic procedures, and we're not talking about the occasional touch-up. The pressure to maintain perfection drove some models to multiple surgeries, constant tweaks, endless attempts to freeze time. Linda Evangelista, the woman who could transform into anyone for the camera, was particularly open about her procedures. Nose jobs, lip enhancements, anything to keep up with the industry's evolving standards. Other models followed suit, turning to surgeons for the kind of perfection that genetics alone couldn't provide. But the pressure went beyond just physical appearance. There was an expectation of constant availability, constant perfection in every aspect of their lives. They had to look perfect at the grocery store, at the airport, walking their dogs. Paparazzi were everywhere, and every unflattering photo could potentially damage their careers. The mental toll was enormous, but talking about it was essentially taboo. These women were living dream lives, making ungodly amounts of money, traveling the world. How could they complain? How could they admit that the pressure was crushing them? The anti-anorexia oath at London Fashion Week was really just the tip of the iceberg. It was one of the few times the industry publicly acknowledged that something was seriously wrong with the standards they were promoting. Behind the scenes, models were dealing with eating disorders, body dysmorphia, anxiety, depression. But the show had to go on. The covers had to be shot. The runways had to be walked. Perfection had to be maintained at all costs. And for some models, those costs were about to become devastatingly clear. In September 2021, Linda Evangelista posted something on Instagram that sent shockwaves through the fashion world. After years of virtual silence, after disappearing from the public eye, she revealed the truth about where she'd been. "Today, I took a big step towards righting a wrong that I have suffered and have kept to myself for over 5 years," she wrote. "To my followers who have wondered why I have not been working while my peers have continued to have exciting careers, the reason is that I was brutally disfigured by Zeltique's cool sculpting procedure, which did the opposite of what it promised." Let that sink in for a moment. The woman who had appeared on over 700 magazine covers, who had been called the chameleon of modeling because she could transform into anyone, was now saying she'd been brutally disfigured by a cosmetic procedure. Cool sculpting was supposed to be a non-invasive way to eliminate fat cells by freezing them. It was marketed as safe, effective, a way for models to maintain their figures without surgery. Linda underwent the procedure around 2016, at the height of the pressure to maintain perfection well into her 50s. But instead of eliminating fat, something called paradoxical adipose hyperplasia occurred. The fat cells didn't disappear. They multiplied. Hard bulges formed on her abdomen, thighs, and chin. She described herself as permanently deformed. "Pa has not only destroyed my livelihood, it has sent me into a cycle of deep depression, profound sadness, and the lowest depths of self-loathing," she wrote. "In the process, I have become a recluse." A recluse. The woman who once said she wouldn't wake up for less than $10,000 a day was now too ashamed to leave her house. The woman who had graced the covers of the world's most prestigious magazines was hiding from cameras. She tried to fix it. Multiple procedures, different doctors, anything to reverse what had happened. Nothing worked. The damage was permanent. Her career, built on physical perfection, was over. Linda filed a lawsuit against Zeltique, the company that made cool sculpting. She claimed the procedure had destroyed her career and caused severe emotional distress. But the money, even if she won, couldn't give her back what she'd lost. The irony was almost too painful to contemplate. Linda Evangelista, who had spent decades being paid for her physical perfection, had been destroyed by the pursuit of that same perfection. A procedure designed to enhance her appearance had instead ended her career. And she wasn't alone. The pressure to maintain impossible standards was driving models to procedures and treatments that sometimes backfired spectacularly. The very industry that had made them rich and famous was now demanding a level of perfection that was literally impossible to achieve safely. Linda's revelation opened up conversations about the dark side of cosmetic procedures, the pressure models faced to maintain their appearances, and the devastating consequences when the pursuit of perfection went wrong. But her story was just one piece of a much larger pattern of how the industry's impossible standards were destroying the lives of the women who seemed to have everything. While Linda Evangelista was dealing with her private nightmare, other supermodels were facing very public implosions that revealed just how much pressure they were under. In September 2005, Kate Moss found herself at the center of an international media firestorm when photographs surfaced of her snorting cocaine. The images were everywhere, splashed across tabloids around the world, and the fashion industry's response was swift and brutal. H&M immediately dropped her from their upcoming clothing campaign. Chanel decided not to renew her contract, officially citing other reasons, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Burberry ended their association with her. In a matter of days, Kate went from fashion icon to industry pariah. The London Metropolitan Police questioned her, though by 2006 all charges were dropped for lack of evidence. But the damage to her career was already done. Major brands that had paid millions for her image were now running from any association with her. Kate's scandal was shocking, but it was also a window into the kind of pressure these women were under, the constant scrutiny, the impossible standards, the need to be on all the time. For someone who had been working since she was 14, who had been in the public eye for over a decade, the pressure must have been suffocating. But Kate's story, devastating as it was, paled in comparison to what happened to Karen Mulder, a Dutch supermodel who had been one of the biggest names of the early 90s. In 2001, Karen gave a televised interview in France that was so explosive, so filled with disturbing allegations, that it was never aired. She made claims about sexual assault by high-profile figures, including Prince Albert II of Monaco. When the interview was canceled, she took her allegations to magazines. The response was immediate. Karen was committed to a psychiatric hospital where she stayed for 5 months. But even that wasn't the end of her nightmare. In December 2002, she attempted suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills. She fell into a coma and nearly died. Karen's breakdown was complete and very public. The woman who had walked for Versace and Chanel, who had appeared on countless magazine covers, had essentially vanished from the fashion world. Her career was over, her mental health was shattered, and she became a cautionary tale about what could happen when the pressure became too much to bear. The fashion industry's response to these crises was telling. When models succeeded, they were celebrated as icons. When they failed, when they couldn't handle the pressure, they were quietly discarded. There was no safety net, no support system, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the standards were impossible to meet. These women had been sold a dream of perfection, wealth, and fame. But nobody had warned them about the cost. Nobody had prepared them for what would happen if they couldn't maintain that perfection forever. Beyond the scandals and the breakdowns, there were tragedies that had nothing to do with the fashion industry, but everything to do with the brutal randomness of life. And for models whose entire careers were built on control, on maintaining perfect images, these tragedies were particularly devastating. Nikki Taylor, the American Wonder Girl model of the 90s, faced not one, but 2 family tragedies that would have broken most people. In 1995, her younger sister Chrissy collapsed and died unexpectedly at just 17 years old. Chrissy had been pursuing modeling herself, following in her sister's footsteps. The autopsy later revealed that Chrissy had died from asthma complications combined with a rare heart arrhythmia. She was a teenager, healthy, with her whole life ahead of her. And she was gone. Nikki somehow found the strength to continue working, to maintain her career even while grieving. But life wasn't done with her yet. In April 2001, she was in a near-fatal car accident in Atlanta. Her boyfriend lost control of their car and crashed into a pole. Nikki fell into a coma that lasted 6 weeks. She suffered multiple fractures and spent months in the hospital. For a while, it wasn't clear if she would survive, let alone ever model again. The woman who had once held 6 simultaneous billboards in Times Square was now fighting for her life in a hospital bed. She did survive, eventually returning to modeling, but the experience had to have been terrifying for someone whose entire career depended on physical perfection. How do you come back from something like that? How do you trust your body again when it's betrayed you so completely? Meanwhile, Naomi Campbell was dealing with her own demons, though hers were more about anger and control than tragedy. Throughout her career, she faced multiple assault convictions for attacking people who frustrated her. There were incidents with housekeepers, police officers, anyone who got in her way when she was having a bad day. Each time, she had to complete court-ordered community service. Each time, the tabloids had a field day with her diva behavior. But looking back, you have to wonder if these explosions were really about being a diva, or if they were about a woman under enormous pressure finally snapping. For someone like Naomi, who had been working since she was a child, who had broken barriers and faced discrimination while maintaining a perfect public image, the pressure must have been overwhelming. Her outbursts weren't excusable, but they were understandable. These women were human beings dealing with human problems while living under superhuman expectations. They were grieving sisters, recovering from accidents, struggling with addiction, battling mental health issues. But they were also expected to look perfect, act perfect, be perfect at all times. The cost of that perfection was becoming clearer with each breakdown, each scandal, each tragedy. The golden age of supermodeling was revealing its dark underbelly, and it wasn't pretty. Today, when we look back at the 90s supermodel era, there's a sense of nostalgia, even celebration. Documentary series are made about the original supers, reunion covers appear in major magazines, and these women are hailed as enduring icons who changed fashion forever. And they did change fashion. They proved that models could be more than just clothes hangers, that they could have real power, real influence, real wealth. They opened doors for future generations and showed that beauty could be a legitimate path to success and independence. But their legacy is complicated, because for all the celebration of their achievements, their documented struggles reveal a different story. They reveal an industry that created impossible standards and then punished the people who couldn't meet them. Linda Evangelista, who once commanded the highest fees in modeling history, now lives as a recluse, too ashamed of her appearance to be photographed. Karen Mulder, who walked for the biggest designers in the world, essentially disappeared from public life after her breakdown. Kate Moss survived her scandal and made a comeback, but at what cost? The industry has changed since then, at least superficially. There's more talk about body positivity, mental health, and the pressure models face, but the fundamental dynamic remains the same. Beauty is still the product, perfection is still the goal, and the people selling that perfection are still paying the price. Linda Evangelista's story is particularly haunting because it represents the ultimate irony of the beauty industry. A woman who was paid millions for her physical perfection was destroyed by her pursuit of that same perfection. The procedure that was supposed to enhance her appearance instead ended her career. "I loved being up on the catwalk," she said in a recent interview. "Now I dread running into someone I know. I can't live like this anymore in hiding and shame." The woman who once said she wouldn't wake up for less than $10,000 a day now can't bear to be seen. The chameleon who could transform into anyone for the camera now hides from all cameras. These women gave us some of the most iconic images in fashion history. They showed us what perfection could look like, what beauty could achieve, what power could be built on appearance alone. But they also showed us the cost of that perfection, the price of that beauty, the isolation of that power.